In my paper, New Science, Old Policies, I argue that the FDA is using sound science as an excuse to justify blatant homophobia that perpetuates decades-old stereotypes that queer men are inherently more likely to carry diseases like HIV and AIDS due to their behavior and lifestyle choices. A majority of my argument stems from Jeffrey Bennett's analysis of the blood ban pre-deferral, focusing on the public response to the ban/deferral. Bennett's book, Banning Queer Blood, was published 11 years ago, and since publication, the queer community has achieved more milestones and has finally begun to turn their attention towards the blood ban. Additionally, a lot of the policies current at the time of publication have since changed, warranting a new look at the blood ban policies and the so-called science that keeps them in place. Blood ban policies of the United States have been disenfranchising the LGBT community for nearly 40 years. Following Ronald Reagan's handling of the AIDS crisis in 1983, wherein a lifetime ban on donating blood for gay and bisexual men was ordered to combat the disease the public knew little about. The FDA lifted the lifetime ban in late 2015, instead moving to a deferral period of 1 year of celibacy for men who have sex with men before they are eligible to donate. Numerous other countries have either reduced their own deferral periods to 3 months of celibacy, or else completely abolished their blood bans. The United States and the FDA seem far off from creating an equitable means of blood donation. Amidst the HIV and AIDS epidemic, in 1983, the United States implemented a lifetime ban on gay and bisexual men donating blood for fear of tainting the blood supply. For 30 years, the United States kept the blood ban in place and refused queer men the opportunity to donate blood, even amongst times of crisis and even as science evolved and the epidemic lessened. Despite numerous meetings held between 1997 and 2007 between the Blood Product Advisory Committee, or BPAC, medical and science professionals, and gay interest groups, wherein the ban was reevaluated and deferral periods were considered, the meetings largely never amounted to more than shaky hypotheses that reinforced the need for a complete ban. In 2010, Arthur Kaplan, a professor of bioethics at the University of Pennsylvania and former chair for the Advisory Committee on Blood Safety and Availability, spoke about the group's decision to uphold the blood ban. Kaplan cited the decision as a matter of discrimination, given the availability of better testing, a decision that cuts the blood donor pool down by 9 or 10%. Further, Kaplan calls the policy not scientifically based, as other countries, like France, have already done away with the ban at this point in time and haven't had any problems with safety in their blood supply systems. In 2013, groups like the American Medical Association made the public declaration that their lifetime ban was discriminatory and not based on sound science, and 86 representatives and senators wrote to the Health and Human Services Department, asking for the ban to be overturned due to the fact that current policies turn away healthy, willing donors in the face of serious blood shortages and perpetuate inaccurate stereotypes that promote discrimination. In 2014, the FDA met with BPAC to once again discuss the blood ban, hearing from queer interest groups, blood transfusion patients, and other health groups. While the committee did not vote on lifting the ban at this time, members of the committee expressed mixed views about lifting it. Additionally, in 2014, the Department of Health and Human Services voted overwhelmingly to change the policy for the first time since the ban was implemented, citing support from medical groups and blood banks, like the American Medical Association and the American Red Cross, who argued that lifting the ban would allow for hundreds of thousands of new donors to combat blood shortages. In December of 2015, the FDA formally lifted the ban on gay and bisexual men for donating blood, instead implementing a 12-month deferral period that requires the men who have sex with men to be celibate for a year before donating. It is important to note here that I could not acquire any formal documentation of the ban lifting from the FDA, as they seem to have removed press release from their website. While it took the United States 32 years to overturn the highly discriminatory lifetime blood ban for men who have sex with men, for other countries it took far less time to implement far more inclusionary measures. In 2001, Italy became the first country on record to remove any sort of ban or deferral on men who have sex with men from donating blood, instead moving to an individual risk-based assessment regardless of sexual orientation. Poland followed suit in 2005, Russia in 2008, and countries like Mexico, Spain, South Africa, and a host of other South American countries followed suit soon after. Presumably high-developed countries such as Canada and the United Kingdom, however, also dragged their feet in lifting their respective blood bans, though not nearly for as long as the U.S. Canada lifted their ban in 2013, moving from a lifetime ban to a 5-year deferral, which they decreased to 1 year in 2016 and decreased once more to 3 months in 2019. The UK, excluding North Ireland, switched to a 1-year deferral period in 2011, and then reduced to a celibacy period down to 3 months in 2017. In light of changing science over the past 30 years that dictates that HIV is not specifically related to homosexuality, many queer advocates feel as though simply switching to a deferral period ignores such advances and continues to stigmatize particular groups of men who have sex with men. Additionally, some argue that switching to a deferral period does not fall in line with the notions of administrative constitutionalism, equal protection, and principles of bioethics set forth by the national government at the same time, given the newly outlined freedoms and protections granted to LGBTQ folk following the legalization of same-sex marriage. U.S. Senator and longtime champion for LGBT rights, Tammy Baldwin, argued that the new deferral was still based on discrimination rather than science, pressing for a policy that is instead based on individual risk factors. Baldwin's call for a revised policy based on individuals speaks similarly to that of the Gay Men's Health Crisis Group, who argues that a year of mandatory celibacy is a de facto lifetime ban, since no requirement is in place for heterosexuals who practice unsafe sex. Lambda Legal, a well-known LGBT rights legal organization, made the case that current testing capabilities allow for all known serious blood-borne pathogens to be identified within 2 months, arguing that a deferral period of any longer than that is strictly unnecessary. According to the American Red Cross, less than 38% of the population of the U.S. is eligible to give blood or platelets. Less than half the population of the whole nation is eligible to give blood, and the system relies completely on voluntary donations. Over the last 4 years, and even before that, the Red Cross has faced a national blood supply shortage, likely due to a dwindling pool of donors. The ARC notes that the supply cannot always meet the demand, because only 3% of age-eligible donors actually donate each year. That 3% equals roughly 6.8 million donors a year in the U.S., accounting for 40% of the nation's blood supply. The ban itself causes a host of issues for the country's blood supply, where the number of available and willing donors continues to dwindle while the shortages increase every year. In fact, in 2010, the letter from the senators to the Department of Health and Human Services even went so far as to claim that denying willing donors the opportunity to help others puts the integrity of the blood donation system at risk. In a country plagued by so much gun violence, the U.S. cannot afford to designate waiting periods before allowing a large pool of donors to donate the gift of life. As I noted before, the American Red Cross consistently faces blood shortages, and given the short lifespan of blood, it seems as though this will continue to be the case unless there is a steady stream of willing donors opening their veins. According to the Williams Institute at the University of California, Los Angeles, in 2019, 5.5 million men in the United States self-identified as a man who has sex with men, meaning that 2% of the entire population is currently barred from donating blood unless they adhere to the waiting period. The fact of the matter is, there is no way to completely guarantee the safety of the blood supply, as even when the ban was in place and even with a deferral, there are still cases where people become ill from blood transfusions. In times of crisis, how can we reasonably expect that we will have the capabilities and capacity to keep our donor pool large if we perpetually expect 2% of them to always be celibate, just in case? Given the nation's blood supply is seemingly perilously low, it seems foolish to continue to miss out on a significant portion of donors. The Community Blood Center claims that if only 1% more of Americans gave blood each year, there would be no more blood shortages for the foreseeable future. Gay and bisexual men make up 2% of the population, meaning that if the deferral period were removed or lessened to 3 months or less, it is highly likely that the United States could see a steady and maintained blood supply for the first time in years. Additionally, studies done in other countries have found that men who have sex with men are willing to donate despite not meeting the criteria under the deferral, and that a further reduction in the deferral period or else a complete removal of the deferral would likely result in an increase in willing donors who are honest in their intentions, thus contributing to a safer blood supply. The U.S. has repeatedly chosen throughout the years to keep the ban in place, grounding their decision in the current science in line with the policies of countries like the UK and Australia. When a decision was finally reached to overturn the lifetime ban and instead implement a deferral period, the U.S. was the last developed country to implement such a policy. Meanwhile, each country who lifted their lifetime ban on men who have sex with men donating blood before the U.S. did so while the implications were pointed out for what doing so meant for the U.S. For instance, one of Russia's leading gay activists said of Russia's move to get rid of the ban, Russia will become an example for other countries like the U.S., where such restrictions are still enforced. When Argentina lifted their blood ban entirely with no deferral period, many human rights groups pointed out the United States' use of archaic concepts like risk groups. The FDA has continually let archaic and tiresome stereotypes about gay men, as well as no longer supported evidence about HIV high-risk groups, dominate their decision-making process in the debate about ending blood donation bans for queer people. As of 2009, 27% of HIV infections were reported to have been contracted via heterosexual contact, And while homosexual men are still statistically more likely to have HIV, the increasing number of heterosexuals with the virus remain a non-issue for the FDA with regards to the blood ban. In countries like Italy, rather than a deferral period that doctors and blood volunteers rely on what Senator Baldwin proposed with an individual risk case, treating each donor separately by their risk factors regardless of sexual orientation or gender. Those countries to whom the United States typically looks to and follows for policy guidance in these cases, like the UK and Canada, have also lessened their own deferral periods to Lambda Legal's recommended 3-month maximum, once again showcasing the FDA's deep-seated discrimination that they disguise as sound science. This so-called sound science being called upon by the FDA is being used to mask the homophobia that still plagues medical policymaking, despite the current science being used by many other countries that allows for individual risk-based assessments that make the need for deferral periods and bans obsolete. Additionally, the FDA continues to ignore the evolution of medicine that allows for men who have sex with men to safely monitor and test themselves for diseases like HIV, with new drugs like Truvada for PrEP, which can test and prevent the spread of HIV in individuals. These breakthroughs continue to allow for the ensured safety of the blood supply without singling out a particular group of people, but instead, the FDA believes the supply is safer when one group that was believed to be the most at risk 40 years ago continues to be barred from donating. The FDA continues to excuse their choice to keep the deferral period set at 12 months as rooted in hard science, though for nearly 2 decades the U.S. has had testing capabilities to safely and completely ensure the blood supply would not be contaminated. Thanks to rapid advances in medicine and science, testing capabilities allow for most diseases transferable through the blood to be detected as early as 9 days after donation. New medicines will also allow for HIV prevention and self-testing, allowing for a slower spread of the deadly infection. As early as the 2000s, scientists have developed and continued perfecting advanced blood testing capabilities in ways that have allowed for ensured blood supply safety, and thus numerous countries have been able to do away with any sort of lifetime blood bans or deferrals. In spite of all of these scientific breakthroughs over the last 2 decades, the U.S. FDA continues to defer gay and bisexual men who have sex with men from donating blood, even in spite of national blood shortage crises. Given current science and medicine standards and practices, it seems clear that the FDA continues to make faulty decisions regarding the ban, simply because they rely on archaic stereotypes and adhere to means of discrimination, using a cover of sound science to excuse their actions. If plenty of other countries from whom we have taken direction before, and even countries whose health policies are often viewed as lesser than ours, are able to take more progressive steps in reducing or removing deferral periods when it comes to blood donations, the FDA should be following in line with those countries and policies. The FDA continually touts that above all, they are looking for ways to make blood donations safer and ensure that supply levels remain high and steady, which they don't. If this is truly the goal of the FDA, however, it is time for America to make its blood donation process great again.